Hey guys, it's Brandon. Welcome to another edition of the Master Game. I found this game of Nigel Short and Garry Kasparov from their World Championship match in 1993. And this was a time in chess history when there was not one official World Championship. Garry Kasparov had gotten into some arguments over various things with FIDE, and split off from FIDE and started his own World Championship. So this was the one played with Nigel Short and Garry Kasparov in '93. I'm not sure which game number it was, but Nigel Short had the white pieces and Garry Kasparov had the black pieces. And it was an exciting, very interesting, very wild finish of a game. So let's have a look. Nigel Short, playing white, started with e4, and Kasparov responded with the Sicilian, his favorite weapon against e4. I think he pretty much in the later part of his career played the Sicilian exclusively against e4. I don't think he played any other opening really. So, okay, knight f3, d6 to d4. We've got an open Sicilian, and specifically a Najdorf variation, which is marked by this a6 move here, which does a few things. It prepares b5, stops a piece from landing on b5. And yeah, so let's see what variation we come up with here. Nigel, options for white here include bishop to g5. That's a very sharp line. Bishop e3, the English attack. Bishop e2, a more positional sort of Karpov system. Or bishop c4, the Fischer-Sozin attack. Those are the four main moves. f4 also is a bit of a lesser played move, but a move. So Nigel plays bishop c4. This is known as the Fischer-Sozin attack. It's a pretty aggressive line. White tries to get the bishop on this diagonal, pointing at the somewhat sensitive f7 square, and black plays e6. This is the standard response to this bishop c4 move. The idea of this e6 move is to blunt the bishop, so that this bishop is just sort of fighting on granite here on this e6 point. So bishop b3, white wants to keep the bishop on this diagonal, and later on he'll try to soften this diagonal, often by playing f4, f5, try to exchange some pawns on this diagonal and really free that bishop on this diagonal, which we see in this game. But first bishop b3, which is to get the bishop off of this sensitive e4 square where it might be subject to a later tempo with the queen coming onto c7, or even b5 with tempo. So the bishop just comes back here. And now this move, knight to d7. I think the main line nowadays is just for white to play b5 anyway. At least I've seen a lot of that recently. But this move, knight d7, maybe this was theory in '93. And I'm no expert on theory of the Fischer-Sozin, but Nigel pushes on with f4, trying to get in the move f5 to try to soften this diagonal. And Garry plays knight to c5. So hitting this bishop, and also hitting the e4 pawn. Oops, the e4 pawn, which is now attacked twice by the black pieces. And this is often a source of counterplay for black in the Sicilian, where he tries to put pressure on e4, sometimes with moves like b5, bishop b7, also pointing at this e4 point. And so this is usually a source of counterplay, but Nigel just ignores it and plays f5. And Garry played bishop e7, and I'm not sure. I tried to figure out what would happen if Garry took this pawn, and I thought that after, f takes e6, stuff like this, knight takes e4, all this liquidation, white has this move, and the move orders can change around a little bit, but white has this move queen g4, which is putting pressure on the e pawn and attacking the knight at the same time. So black can play the move knight to c5, and white can't go ahead and grab this bishop because of queen e7, pinning the bishop to the king, and that would just win a piece. So it can't be taken yet, but maybe after just the move castles here, it's sort of hard to see how white really hangs on to, how black hangs on to this pawn, and White has just a big lead in development. Two very nice bishops on an open board. The rook is on the f-file, stopping, which is open, stopping black from castling kingside. It sort of seems dangerous to go queenside, so this sort of position, I think, is what Garry didn't want to end up with, and thus decided not to take the pawn on e4 after f5. So instead he played bishop e7, just getting some development. And now Short played queen f3, transferring the queen onto the king side. Possibly later on, moves like queen here or queen here or queen here can help fuel a kingside attack. So really, White in this type of opening and in this game is just going for all-out attack, and it's going to be up to Black to defend and try to find counterplay. So castles, bishop e3, some development, and now Black decides to clarify the situation in the center by playing the move e5, taking away the d4 square from this knight, forcing the knight to move, but also weakening this diagonal. Another question, and I'm not really sure about the answer, is if this diagonal is such a big deal, why not just take the bishop at any given time here? I mean, Nigel doesn't seem particularly interested in holding on to this bishop, since it can just be taken at any time. But in any case, knight de2, and then Black played b5. Now, as a result of this this move e5, which is seen in a lot of other Najdorf variations earlier, this d5 square has become a little bit weak. There's no pawn anywhere that could chase a piece off of this d5 square. So Nigel temporarily sort of changes tack here and decides to play on this d5 square. So he brings the bishop into d5 with tempo on the rook. Again, if it were me, I would just consider taking it. But Kasparov is patient. He plays rook b8. And now Nigel plays this move b4, chasing this knight off of the central post, and also stopping Black from playing the move b4, which would really kind of solidify this knight here on this c5 square, and also chase his own knight away from defense and eyeing this d5 square. So b4, okay? So the knight moves, but as a result of this b4 move, this pawn here on c2 has become backwards and can be attacked later on this open c-file, which is where Black, of course, would like to get his counterplay in the Sicilian, being that this is the open file for Black in the Sicilian. So a bit of a double-edged move there, and actually we see, as the game goes on, there are some trades here, and after bishop b7, threatening to take the knight off, White doesn't want to have to retake with a pawn on the d5 square, because that would eliminate the weakness. He wants to be able to keep a piece there. So knight to d5, and now knight to c2, reinforcing the knight on d5, and now Garry's okay with some more trades on d5, which we get. So all the pieces come off on d5, except what is left is this rook here on d5, which maybe seems a little bit out of place, but actually has some important play later on in the game. So rook c8, okay, putting pressure on this pawn here. Well, Black's got to look for counterplay in the Sicilian, and that's the point of attack, the really clear point of attack for him at this moment. So queen g4 comes in, and Garry plays this move f6. And it's interesting, I think that if it's not really possible to take this pawn because of the move bishop h6. This pawn is pinned, okay, by the queen, and Black, of course, is just threatening this move queen takes h6, and there's no possibility of bishop f6 defending, which looks really nice, and it looks like Black has won a pawn. But it's a very common theme in these positions with f5 and kingside pushes, that Black just has the move, White just has the move bishop takes g7, and if bishop takes g7, then just f6 immediately wins the game. The bishop is pinned, and White is threatening mate with queen takes g2, and the only really way to prevent mate would be to take the pawn off with the queen, and then just rook takes queen, and the game is just over. So that's not possible. So that, as a result of all that, after bishop h6, black would be sort of forced to play the move g6, where after, giving up the exchange, he's got a pawn for it, and an active rook on the c-file, and maybe it's okay, but this bishop, and white's attack certainly will never succeed with this bishop that can never be taken away, but it's still an exchange, and the bishop is not really very active, so that's why after queen g4 we didn't see rook takes c2. Instead we saw this move f6, which prevents white from ever pushing this pawn onto f6. But on the other hand, it does leave some of these squares, these light squares, a little weakened. So we see Nigel sort of prepare to play on those weak light squares. He plays the move rook f3, a rook lift, preparing to get this rook onto h3 or maybe to g3 to try to put pressure on the king. Rook takes c2. Okay, now Kasparov decides he has time to take the pawn. Rook h3, and now he plays this defensive move, rook f7, which both defends this g7 point and possibly gives the king an escape route in any attacks on f8. I think maybe it was too dangerous to play here rook takes a2, where after queen h5, h6 isn't really possible. Bishop takes h6. Well, g takes h6 is just losing to queen check, king h8, and then rook mate. So it looked a little bit too dangerous to go sort of irresponsibly grabbing another pawn. So instead of rook takes a2, Kasparov just plays rook h3, defensive move. Anyway, queen h5 comes in anyway, and h6 is played. Now the only real way for white to break through in this position is to try to sack with this bishop on h6 at some point. But first, it doesn't work right away, just to show that if he takes on h6 right away, then g takes h6, and if queen takes h6, then black has this nice move, rook g7, defending the threats and getting counterplay on the g2 square, right? So the rooks are coordinating on the g2 square. So that would be a very nice defense. And of course now white has just given up a piece, and even this check on h8 is not doing anything, just king f7, and there's no more checks. Queen's threatened, even this, just king f8, and if queen check, then rook blocks, and there's really nothing for white here. So after h6, after queen h5, h6, instead of taking the pawn, queen g6, he played rook f7, and then queen h5, h6, queen g6. Okay. Now this pawn is pinned, so there is a threat of either bishop or rook coming in and taking in the h6 pawn, because there's no way for black to recapture back because of the pin. But now because of this rook f7 move, he has the king f8 square, and getting out of the pin, and thus being able to recapture with the pawn. So Nigel just plays bishop takes h6 anyway. And after g takes h6, rook takes h6. And now, actually, it seems like, black is in a lot of trouble. White has this threat of rook h8 mate. And, it looks sort of like an awkward threat to defend. How do you really defend this threat? Okay, if rook g7 attacking the queen, then just rook takes h8 anyway. And this is just mating. There's nowhere for the king to go, so the rook has to block, and then this is just mating. So, after rook takes h6, king e8 doesn't work, because, rook h8, and this rook is pinned, so there's no blocking. But this would move, this would win the whole house here. Oops. And now white is just up a queen for a bishop, and a terrible bishop at that. So bishop f8, I think probably fails to just this move, rook h7. And it seems maybe awkward to defend the pin. I'm not really sure. Actually, let's take a look at this variation. What about, I didn't do any prior analysis. Let's see, king e8, rook h8, and bishop f8. So let's just do a quick computer check to see what happens on bishop f8. Is there, yeah, rook h, computer's saying rook h7, and now queen c7, somewhere along the way after, oops. Well, I guess the idea is after king e8, then just go straight to rook h7. Don't even bother with the check. And there's no way to defend this rook, or the mate threats, really. So, I mean, what's white really doing? So, okay. So what happens? How does black defend against this seemingly indefensible threat of rook takes h6? Well, Kasparov finds the only way to defend this threat, and he plays queen b6 check. So suddenly now it looks like white is the one in trouble and possibly getting mated, because this rook is on the 7th rank. The king can't go into the corner here because of mate on the back rank, and rook blocks is the only move, and then this is just mate. And if the king comes here, then just queen coming down to f2 is mate. So what's going on in this game, you know? Queen b6 check, and it looks like both sides are on the verge of getting mated. But actually, white has one move that saves the game for him. He has this move, rook takes c5. Rook c5, which is, of course, leaving this rook hanging. But there's no time for black to take this rook because of the rook mate. So, after rook c5, black still has to come up with a way to stop the mate from coming through. He finds the only move, as far as I can see, the only move, bishop d8, which now vacates the square on e7 for the king to come to. And now after rook h8 check, king e7, and rook h7, rook takes h7, queen takes h7. Unbelievably, with all these pieces hanging and all these mates threatened, this game is a draw. There's no way for black to escape the perpetual checks with the queen. And actually, after the move king f8, both sides agreed to the position as a draw. And let's just show you here. There's really no way for black to get out of the perpetual checks. The rook actually is stopping the king from getting across this file. But you know, even still, it really shouldn't really mean anything anyway. Okay, queen check here would be mate, so the king can't run that way. So the king has to sort of stay on these squares here. So there's really no way to, if he tries to get to here, then the queen mates. So there's really no way to get away from any of these checks. So the game was agreed drawn here, and really just a wild game where it looked like both sides were getting mated at one point, and it ended up being a draw. So let's just go briefly through it. In summary, we had a Najdorf with bishop c4. White played e6 and knight d7, f4. So white is trying to soften the diagonal and get some development. And now black played e5, forcing the knight back, and b5. Now white sort of switches to this d5 strategy. Now all these pieces start coming off on d5, and we're left with a rook on d5 and just a few pieces to sort of carry out the attack. But Nigel does a pretty good job after queen g4, f6, rook f3, trying to get some threats in on the position. You know, we see all this stuff. King f8, and the bishop comes in. Now, of course, this move, bishop queen b6 check, the only move that saves the game. And looks like white's getting mated, but rook c5 saves the game for white as well. Bishop d8, only move to get the king here, and now it just sort of fizzles out, and there's no way for black to escape the checks, with the queen. So the game was agreed drawn. So a really interesting, really exciting game. I enjoyed it, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. So yeah, I'll see you again soon with some new videos. Thanks for watching.